me. Oh my gosh. Yes.
The red roses appeared only when it rained, always placed with surgical precision at the same 7 locations throughout Cedar Falls. Maya Chan had been tracking the mysterious deliveries for 3 weeks, but tonight she would finally discover that the person leaving them was someone she thought she had lost forever, and the roses carried a message 15 years in the making. Before we uncover the mystery behind these rain-soaked roses and the shocking reunion that awaits Maya, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us bring you more heartwarming romantic stories every week. Now let's step into the storm with Maya as she's about to discover that some love stories never truly end. Maya Chin stood at the rain-streaked window of Petals and Promises, watching the storm that had been brewing all afternoon finally unleash itself on the small town of Cedar Falls. The flower shop had been hers for exactly 3 months, inherited from her great-aunt Lily, who had run it for 40 years before her passing in the spring. Maya had left her corporate marketing job in Seattle to move to Cedar Falls, partly out of obligation to keep Aunt Lily's legacy alive, but mostly because she needed a complete change after her divorce finalized 6 months ago. At 32, she felt like she was starting her life over in a town that held more childhood memories than adult ones. The first time Maya noticed the mysterious roses, she thought it was simply someone with a romantic gesture gone astray. It had been a Tuesday evening in early October, after a brief but intense thunderstorm. She had been closing the shop when she spotted a single red rose placed carefully on the steps of the old Cedar Falls Theater, its petals glistening with rainwater. Maya had assumed it was meant for someone specific, perhaps a token of apology or affection that would be collected later. But the rose remained there until the next morning when she watched Mrs. Patterson, the theater manager, discover it with obvious confusion before taking it inside. 2 days later, after another evening storm, Maya found roses in 3 different locations during her walk home. One lay on the bench outside the town library, another was propped against the memorial fountain in the center square, and a third rested on the windowsill of Cooper's Coffee House. Each rose was perfect, fresh, and placed with obvious care. Maya's florist training, recently acquired through intensive online courses and hands-on practice, told her these were premium roses, the kind that cost considerable money and require proper care. Someone was spending significant resources on this mysterious gesture, and Maya found herself increasingly curious about their identity and motivation. By the 3rd week of October, Maya had identified a clear pattern. The roses appeared only after evening rainstorms, always at the same 7 locations throughout town. Besides the theater, library, fountain, and coffee house, Maya had discovered roses at the entrance to Cedar Falls Elementary School, on the porch of the old Victorian bed and breakfast, and most intriguingly, on the grave of Thomas Mitchell in Riverside Cemetery. Maya began researching Thomas Mitchell and learned he had been a local businessman who died in a car accident 15 years ago. He had been only 28, unmarried, and, according to the newspaper obituary, survived by his parents and a younger sister. The accident had happened during a severe thunderstorm in late October, almost exactly 15 years ago to the day. The connection between Thomas Mitchell and the mysterious roses intrigued Maya, but she couldn't piece together why someone would honor his memory in such an elaborate way, or what significance the other 6 locations might have held for him. Maya decided to investigate more systematically. She began staying late at the shop on stormy evenings, watching from her windows to see if she could spot whoever was placing the roses. The flower shop was centrally located on Main Street, giving her a view of several of the mysterious locations. It was during the fourth week of her surveillance that Maya finally saw him. The storm that Thursday evening was particularly intense, with thunder that rattled the shop windows and rain that fell in sheets across the empty streets. Maya had positioned herself at the front window with a cup of tea and a clear view of both the memorial fountain and the coffee house. She almost missed him in the darkness and driving rain, but a flash of lightning illuminated a tall figure moving purposefully through the storm. The man walked with a slight limp, wore a dark raincoat, and carried what appeared to be a waterproof bag. Maya watched as he approached the memorial fountain and carefully placed a rose at its base, taking a moment to arrange it perfectly despite the harsh weather. Something about his silhouette struck Maya as familiar, though she couldn't immediately place why. The man moved through the rain as if he knew every street and sidewalk intimately, navigating the storm with the confidence of someone who had walked these routes many times before. Maya grabbed her raincoat and umbrella, determined to follow him and finally solve the mystery that had been consuming her thoughts for weeks. She locked the shop quickly and ventured into the storm, trying to keep the mysterious figure in sight while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. The man's route took him to each of the 7 locations Maya had identified, and she watched from hiding spots as he placed perfect red roses with the same careful attention at every stop. His movements were methodical but reverent, as if each placement held deep personal significance. It was at the cemetery that Maya finally got close enough to see his face clearly. Lightning illuminated the scene as the man knelt beside Thomas Mitchell's grave, placing the final rose of the evening. Maya found herself holding her breath as recognition hit her like a physical blow. The face she was looking at belonged to Thomas Mitchell himself, 15 years older and bearing a scar along his left temple, but unmistakably the same person whose obituary she had read. Maya's mind reeled with the impossibility of what she was seeing. Thomas Mitchell was supposed to be dead, killed in a car accident during a storm just like this one, exactly 15 years ago. Yet here he was, alive, and placing roses on his own grave with an expression of profound sadness and regret. Maya must have made a sound of shock because Thomas suddenly looked up from the grave, his eyes meeting hers across the cemetery. In that moment, Maya saw recognition flash across his face as well, and she realized that he knew exactly who she was. The two of them stared at each other through the rain for what felt like an eternity. Maya remembered Thomas from high school, though they had moved in different circles and rarely spoke. He had been popular, athletic, and confident, while she had been studious, quiet, and focused on getting into a good college. But she also remembered having a secret crush on him during their senior year, though she had never admitted it to anyone. Thomas stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. He walked toward Maya with obvious recognition and what appeared to be a mixture of relief and apprehension. When he reached her, standing close enough that she could see the rain running down his face, Maya felt 15 years collapse between them. Thomas told her that he knew she had been watching, that he had seen her at the flower shop window during his rose deliveries. He explained that he had been hoping she would eventually follow him, that he had been wanting to talk to her ever since she returned to Cedar Falls, but hadn't known how to approach her. Maya's mind was spinning with questions, but the most pressing one was obvious. Thomas was supposed to be dead, yet here he was, very much alive, and apparently living in Cedar Falls under some kind of assumed identity. Thomas suggested they get out of the storm, and Maya found herself following him to a pickup truck parked at the cemetery's back entrance. They drove in silence to a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a place Maya didn't recognize, but that clearly served as Thomas's home. Inside the cozy cabin, with the fire crackling in the stone fireplace and towels provided to dry off from the storm, Thomas began to explain the truth about the night 15 years ago that had changed both of their lives. The car accident had indeed happened, and Thomas had indeed nearly died. He had been in a coma for 3 weeks and suffered traumatic brain injury that required months of rehabilitation. During his recovery, his family had made the devastating decision to allow everyone to believe he had died, partly to protect him from the legal consequences of the accident, and partly because his injuries had initially seemed so severe that a normal life seemed impossible. Thomas explained that he had been drinking that night, driving recklessly through the storm after a fight with his girlfriend. He had struck and killed a pedestrian, an elderly man who had been trying to get home from work. The guilt and horror of taking an innocent life had consumed Thomas during his recovery, and he had agreed with his family's decision to let Thomas Mitchell officially die. He had spent the past 15 years living under a new identity, working as a carpenter and handyman throughout the region, sending anonymous donations to the victim's family, and trying to find some way to atone for the life he had taken. The roses were part of his memorial ritual, placed at locations that had been significant to the man he had killed, who had frequented the library, the coffee shop, the theater, and the other spots where Thomas left his weekly tributes. Maya listened to Thomas's story with a mixture of shock, sympathy, and growing understanding. The man sitting across from her was clearly carrying an enormous burden of guilt and grief, but she could also see that he had spent 15 years trying to become a better person, trying to honor the life he had taken through service and remembrance. Thomas told Maya that seeing her return to Cedar Falls had awakened feelings and memories he had thought were buried forever. In high school, he had been aware of her quiet intelligence and kindness, though he had been too caught up in his own social world to appreciate what a remarkable person she was. Now, watching her run the flower shop with such care and dedication, he found himself falling in love with the woman she had become. Maya found herself deeply moved by Thomas's story and his obvious remorse. She could see that the cocky teenager she had known had been transformed by tragedy and guilt into a thoughtful, compassionate man who had dedicated his life to making amends for his past mistakes. Over the following weeks, Maya and Thomas began spending time together, carefully and quietly, given the complexity of his situation. Maya learned that Thomas had been living as David Coleman, the identity his family had created for him during his recovery. He had become a skilled craftsman working on restoration projects throughout the state, and he had built a reputation for honest, beautiful work. Thomas had been hoping for years that he might find a way to make his situation right, possibly by revealing the truth and accepting whatever legal consequences might follow. But the longer he had lived under his assumed identity, the more complicated the situation had become, and the more afraid he had become of destroying the new life he had built. Maya struggled with her own feelings about Thomas's situation. Part of her understood and admired the man he had become, while another part of her was troubled by the deception that had allowed him to escape accountability for his actions. She found herself researching the accident, learning about the victim, William Hayes, and trying to understand all the ripple effects of that tragic night. William Hayes had been a widower with one daughter, Rebecca, who had been 22 at the time of her father's death. Maya discovered that Rebecca still lived in Cedar Falls, working as a nurse at the regional hospital and raising 2 children as a single mother. The anonymous donations Rebecca had been receiving for 15 years had helped her complete nursing school and provide for her family. Maya realized that Thomas's situation affected more people than just himself, and she began to understand why he struggled with the question of whether to reveal the truth. Coming forward might provide closure for Rebecca Hayes, but it could also destroy the financial support that had been helping her family for 15 years. As Maya and Thomas's relationship deepened, They spent long hours discussing the ethical implications of his choices and the possibility of finding a way forward that could honor both his need for redemption and Rebecca's need for truth and closure. Maya suggested that Thomas consider revealing himself to Rebecca privately, allowing her to decide how she wanted to handle the knowledge of his survival and his identity as the person responsible for her father's death. Thomas was terrified of this possibility, but he also recognized that Maya was right about Rebecca's right to know the truth. The conversation that would change everything happened in November, during another of the autumn storms that had become the backdrop for so much of Maya and Thomas's relationship. They were in Maya's apartment above the flower shop, and Maya had been pressing Thomas to consider meeting with Rebecca Hayes. Thomas finally admitted that his greatest fear wasn't legal consequences or social judgment, but the possibility that revealing the truth would destroy the sense of peace and healing that Rebecca seemed to have found. He had been watching her from a distance for years, seeing her build a successful career and raise her children, and he was terrified that his presence would reopen wounds that had finally begun to heal. Maya understood Thomas's concern, but she also pointed out that he was making decisions for Rebecca without giving her the opportunity to choose for herself. Maya suggested that she could serve as an intermediary, approaching Rebecca carefully and giving her the opportunity to decide whether she wanted to meet the person who had been anonymously supporting her family. After much discussion and soul-searching, Thomas agreed to Maya's plan. Maya approached Rebecca Hayes at the hospital where she worked, introducing herself as someone who had information about the anonymous donations Rebecca had been receiving since her father's death. Rebecca was initially suspicious and guarded, but Maya's gentle approach and obvious sincerity eventually convinced her to listen. Maya explained that the person making the donations was someone who had been deeply affected by William Hayes's death and wanted to make amends, though she didn't immediately reveal the full truth about Thomas's identity and survival. Rebecca was intelligent and perceptive, and she began asking pointed questions about the donor's identity and connection to her father's death. Maya realized that Rebecca had suspected for years that the donations were connected to the accident, and that she'd been waiting for someone to provide answers to questions that had haunted her for 15 years. When Maya finally revealed that the donor was Thomas Mitchell, supposedly dead but actually living under an assumed identity, Rebecca's reaction was complex and emotional. She was angry about the deception, grief-stricken about the reopening of old wounds, but also curious about the man who had been supporting her family while living with the burden of what he had done. Rebecca agreed to meet Thomas, but only on her terms and in a location where she felt safe. Maya arranged for the meeting to take place at the flower shop after hours, with herself present to facilitate the conversation if needed. The meeting between Thomas and Rebecca was one of the most emotionally intense experiences Maya had ever witnessed. Thomas, who had spent 15 years carrying guilt and regret, was finally able to apologize directly to the daughter of the man he had killed. Rebecca, who had spent those same years wondering about the circumstances of her father's death and the identity of her anonymous benefactor, was finally able to get answers to her questions. The conversation was difficult and painful, but also cathartic for both of them. Rebecca was able to express her anger and grief directly to the person responsible, while Thomas was able to take full accountability for his actions and their consequences. Maya watched as two people who had been profoundly shaped by the same tragic event finally found a way to face each other with honesty and humanity. Rebecca didn't forgive Thomas immediately, nor did she absolve him of responsibility for her father's death, but she did acknowledge the magnitude of what he had been trying to do through his anonymous support, and she recognized the genuine remorse and transformation she saw in him. Over the following months, Rebecca, Thomas, and Maya worked together to figure out a way forward that could honor everyone's needs and interests. Rebecca decided that she didn't want to press for legal prosecution, recognizing that Thomas had already paid a significant price and had been working to make amends in the only way available to him. Instead, Rebecca proposed that Thomas establish a formal foundation in her father's memory, providing support for families affected by drunk driving accidents. This would allow Thomas to continue his efforts to atone for his actions while creating something positive and lasting from the tragedy that had shaped all their lives. Maya found herself playing a crucial role in helping Thomas and Rebecca navigate their complex relationship and shared history. She helped Thomas set up the William Hayes Memorial Foundation, using her business skills to create a sustainable organization that could provide ongoing support for families dealing with similar tragedies. Through this process, Maya's own relationship with Thomas deepened and evolved. She saw him working to build something meaningful from his past mistakes, and she watched him find a sense of purpose and redemption that he had been seeking for 15 years. Thomas's relationship with Rebecca also evolved, moving from confrontation to cooperation to something approaching friendship. Rebecca never forgot what Thomas had done, but she came to appreciate the man he had become and the genuine effort he had made to honor her father's memory. The foundation's first major fundraising event was held in the spring, exactly 1 year after Maya had returned to Cedar Falls. The event was held at the Cedar Falls Community Center, with Thomas publicly acknowledged as David Coleman, the foundation's primary organizer and benefactor. Maya realized that night, watching Thomas speak about the foundation's mission and seeing Rebecca in the audience supporting the work they had built together, that love could indeed grow from the most unlikely circumstances. Her relationship with Thomas was built not just on romantic attraction, but on shared values, mutual respect, and a commitment to building something positive from difficult experiences. Later that evening, as they walked home through a gentle spring rain, Thomas told Maya that he wanted to spend his life with her. He had applied to legally change his name back to Thomas Mitchell, ready to reclaim his identity and build a future that honored both his past and his hopes for tomorrow. Maya realized that she had found in Thomas a partner who understood that love meant not just sharing joy, but also supporting each other through difficult truths and complex choices. Their relationship had been forged through honesty, tested by adversity, and strengthened by their shared commitment to doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. Thomas proposed to Maya on a rainy evening in October, exactly 1 year after she had first followed him through the storm to discover his secret. He presented her with a ring he had designed and crafted himself, incorporating small rose details that honored the mysterious deliveries that had brought them together. Maya said yes without hesitation, knowing that she was choosing a partner who had learned to transform guilt into purpose, secrecy into honesty, and isolation into connection. Their love story had begun with mystery and rain-soaked roses, but it had grown into something real and lasting through their shared commitment to truth and redemption. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at the flower shop, with Rebecca Hayes serving as one of Maya's bridesmaids and the William Hayes Memorial Foundation providing flowers for families who couldn't afford them. The ceremony was held during a brief spring shower, and Maya laughed as she realized that rain would always be part of their love story. In the years that followed, Maya and Thomas built a life together that honored both their individual dreams and their shared commitment to service. The flower shop thrived under Maya's leadership, becoming known for both beautiful arrangements and generous community support. The foundation grew into a regional resource for families affected by drunk driving accidents, providing both financial assistance and emotional support. Thomas continued his work as a craftsman, but now he also traveled to schools and community groups, sharing his story as part of drunk driving prevention programs. His willingness to take responsibility for his past actions and demonstrate the possibility of redemption made him an effective advocate for making better choices. Maya and Thomas never forgot that their love story had begun with secrets and tragedy, but they had chosen to build something beautiful and meaningful from those difficult origins. They continued the tradition of placing roses around town during rainstorms, but now the flowers honored not just William Hayes's memory, but also the power of love to transform lives and communities. On quiet evenings, when rain drummed against the windows of their home, Maya and Thomas would remember the storm-soaked night when she had first followed him into the darkness. They had discovered that some secrets needed to be revealed, some wounds needed to be healed, and some love stories needed to begin with truth-telling rather than romance. Maya Chen Mitchell had returned to Cedar Falls looking for a fresh start, and she had found a love story more complex and meaningful than any she could have imagined. The mysterious roses in the rain had led her not just to love, but to a deeper understanding of redemption, forgiveness, and the possibility of building something beautiful from the most broken circumstances. In the end, she learned that the most powerful roses were not the perfect ones displayed in flower shop windows, but the ones placed with intention and sacrifice, watered by rain and tears, and given meaning through the courage to face the truth and choose love anyway.